The Carathan flagship Divine Judgment hung in the void like a cathedral made of starlight and arrogance. Its bioluminescent hull pulsed with patterns that had convinced 1,000 civilizations to prostrate themselves in worship. Captain Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the observation port of the human transport Defiant Dawn, watching the alien vessel's hypnotic display with the cold calculation of a predator studying prey. "Beautiful, isn't it?" whispered Dr. Sarah Chun, the xenobiologist assigned to their diplomatic mission. Her breath fogged the reinforced glass as she leaned closer, like watching liquid lightning dance. Elena's scarred hands, souvenirs from the Martian mining wars, clenched into fists. Beauty doesn't stop bullets, document. And it sure as hell doesn't justify what they did to New Geneva. The memory hit her like a physical blow. 13 million colonists. Gone. Not destroyed in battle, not conquered and enslaved, but simply erased. The Carathan had descended from the heavens, pronounced humanity unworthy of divine grace, and turned an entire world into cosmic dust with a gesture that their worshippers called a cleansing light. "Captain," came a voice from behind them. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb approached with a measured gait of a man who'd learned to walk carefully around his own rage. His dark skin bore the ritual scars of a dozen human colonies. Each mark a promise to the dead. The God Emperor is ready to receive us. Elena turned from the viewport, her reflection briefly superimposed over the alien ship. She looked older than her 38 years, whether by loss and hardened by necessity. Her grandmother's rosary hung around her neck, a gift from a woman who'd lived through humanity's first steps into space and died believing the universe held room for both faith and dignity. "Remember the protocol," Dr. Chin said, her voice tight with nervous energy. "We kneel when presented to His Divine Eminence. We speak only when spoken to. We do what we have to do," Elena cut her off. "But Doc, I've been fighting wars since I was 16. I've buried friends on 6 different worlds. And I've never once gotten on my knees for anyone who wasn't worth the gesture." The docking bay of the Divine Judgment was a marvel of organic engineering. Living walls pulsed with veins of liquid light, while the deck beneath their feet felt warm and slightly yielding, like walking across the skin of some impossibly vast creature. The air itself seemed to hum with power, charged with energy that made Elena's hair stand on end and her teeth ache. A procession of lesser Carathan guided them through corridors that defied human understanding of architecture. Gravity shifted and flowed around them. Walls curved impossibly into themselves, and the very concept of up became a matter of personal interpretation. Elena had read the reports, studied the footage from a handful of human survivors who'd witnessed Carathan vessels, but experiencing it firsthand was like trying to breathe underwater. The Carathan themselves were living contradictions. Tall as humans but slender as reeds, their translucent skin revealed the slow pulse of bioluminescent organs beneath. They moved with a fluid grace that suggested they were swimming through the air rather than walking, and their faces, if they could be called faces, were arrangements of features that seemed to shift when observed directly. They spoke in harmonics that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the bones, their words carrying undertones of music and mathematics that human minds could only partially comprehend. "The faithful of 1,000 worlds have dreamed of this moment," intoned the lead Carathan, its voice like wind chimes in a hurricane. To stand in the presence of the God Emperor is to touch the infinite. Elena felt Staff Sergeant Webb tense beside her. Both of them had seen divine intervention before, on Proxima Colony, where the Carathan had lifted entire cities into orbit before letting them fall, calling it a lesson in gravity's sacred law. On Kepler Station, where they'd turned the station's fusion reactor into a miniature star, claiming they were gifting the humans with their own sun. Always, the survivors spoke of the Carathan's casual omnipotence, their ability to reshape reality with a thought. But Elena had been fighting impossible odds since she was old enough to hold a rifle. She'd learned that gods bleed just like anyone else if you hit them hard enough in the right place. The throne room, though room was an inadequate word for the space they entered, existed in dimensions that hurt to perceive. The God Emperor sat, floated, existed, at the center of a sphere that seemed both infinitely large and intimately small. Light bent around him in patterns that suggested he was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, and when he spoke, reality itself seemed to pause and listen. Humans, the God Emperor said, and the word carried the weight of judgment and the finality of entropy. Small, brief creatures from a small, brief world. You stand before divinity incarnate, before the architect of cosmic law, before the light that banishes all darkness. Why do you not kneel? Dr. Chin dropped immediately, her knees hitting the organic deck with a wet sound. Several of the diplomatic attaches followed suit, their training overriding their dignity. But Elena remained standing, as did Staff Sergeant Webb. Around them, the air began to thicken with what felt like divine displeasure. "We come as representatives of humanity," Elena said, her voice steady despite the pressure building in her skull. "We seek understanding, dialogue, perhaps even peace." The God Emperor's laughter was the sound of stars being born and dying in accelerated time. Understanding? Child of dirt and dreams. You seek to understand the mind of God? You, whose species has existed for mere moments in a cosmic dance, would treat with beings who were shaping reality when your sun was but a whisper of gas in the void. Elena felt blood begin to trickle from her nose. The pressure was enormous now, like being at the bottom of an ocean of pure contempt. But she felt pressure before, the weight of command, the crushing responsibility of keeping her soldiers alive in impossible situations, the knowledge that every decision she made rippled outward to affect millions of lives. "I've never met a god before," she said, wiping the blood away with the back of her hand. "But I've met plenty of bullies. And you know what I've learned about bullies?" The God Emperor leaned forward, interest flickering across features that defied description. "Enlighten me, mortal child." Elena smiled. It was a smile of a woman who'd been counting cards her whole life and was finally ready to show her hand. They always underestimate the little guy. That's when Staff Sergeant Webb moved. He was fast, faster than any human had a right to be in the presence of a god. His combat implants, military-grade cybernetics that turned bone into titanium and muscle into hydraulic power, fired all at once. He crossed the impossible distance to the throne in a heartbeat, his reinforced fist connecting with what might have been the God Emperor's jaw with a sound like thunder. The God Emperor didn't just fall. He crashed into the wall behind his throne with enough force to crack the living architecture. Bioluminescent fluid, golden and thick as honey, splattered across the organic surfaces. And for the first time in 10,000 years of cosmic dominion, a Carathan god tasted his own mortality. The silence that followed was absolute, not just quiet, but a complete absence of sound that seemed to extend beyond the physical into realms of meaning and possibility. The lesser Carathans stood frozen, their belief systems crumbling in real time as they processed what they just witnessed. Dr. Chin stared with her mouth open, her scientific worldview performing emergency reconstruction. Even the walls seemed to have stopped their eternal pulsing. Then the God Emperor began to laugh. It started low, a rumble that seemed to come from the ship's hull itself, then built into something vast and terrible and completely insane. Golden blood streamed from what might have been his nose, pooling in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Magnificent," he roared, rising to his feet with fluid grace despite the obvious pain. "Do you understand what you have done, little human? Do you comprehend the cosmic significance of this moment?" Staff Sergeant Webb stood ready for another attack, but Elena raised a hand to stop him. Something had changed in the God Emperor's voice. The crushing weight of divine authority had given way to something that sounded almost excited. "You have proven something that the faithful of 1,000 worlds could not," the God Emperor continued, golden blood still streaming down his face. "You have demonstrated that gods are not untouchable, that the divine can bleed. That worship is not the only possible response to power." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's atmosphere. "What are you saying?" The God Emperor's features shifted into what might have been a smile, if smiles could carry the weight of galaxies. "I am saying, Captain Elena Vasquez of the human vessel Defiant Dawn, that your species has just passed the first test." The healing chamber aboard the Divine Judgment was a cathedral of living tissue and flowing light. Elena found herself suspended in a web of organic fibers that responded to her thoughts, providing exactly the right pressure to ease the lingering effects of divine proximity. Golden healing fluid, the same that poured from the God Emperor's wounds, circulated through tubes that pulsed with their own heartbeat. She wasn't alone. Staff Sergeant Webb floated nearby, his augmented body interfacing with Kerathan biotechnology in ways that should have been impossible. Dr. Chin drifted between them, frantically taking readings with instruments that kept shorting out from exposure to energies they weren't designed to measure. "I still can't believe you punched a god," Elena said, her voice echoing strangely in the fluid-filled chamber. Webb's scarred face carried a grim satisfaction. "Felt good. Felt necessary." "The physiological readings are incredible," Dr. Chin interrupted, her scientific excitement temporarily overriding the trauma of recent events. "The healing compound they're using is rewriting cellular damage at the quantum level. Marcus, your combat implants are actually improving, becoming more efficient. It's like the technology is learning from your biology." Elena closed her eyes, trying to process everything that happened. The God Emperor's words echoed in her memory. "Your species has just passed the first test." What test? What were they being tested for? And why did she have a growing certainty that humanity had just been recruited for something far larger and more dangerous than a diplomatic mission? The chamber door dilated with a wet sound, and the God Emperor entered. Up close, without the reality-bending effects of his throne room, he looked more alien and somehow more human at the same time. The golden blood had been cleaned away, but Elena could see the faint discoloration where Webb's fist had connected. "Comfortable?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his harmonized voice. "We've been in worse places," Elena replied carefully. "Though I have to say, this is definitely the strangest medical treatment I've ever received." The God Emperor moved closer, his translucent form seeming to flow rather than walk. "Your staff sergeant's augmentations were fascinating to examine. Human military technology integrated with human biology in ways that amplify both. Most species either fully embrace organic enhancement or fully commit to mechanical augmentation. Humans, as always, choose both." "You sound like you've studied us," Webb said, his voice tight with suspicion. "More than studied," the God Emperor admitted. "We have been observing humanity for some time. Your species represents something unique in the galaxy, a combination of traits that should not coexist." Dr. Chin leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her caution. "What kind of traits?" The God Emperor gestured, and the healing chamber's walls became transparent, revealing the vast cosmos beyond. Stars wheeled in their ancient dance. Galaxies spiraled through the void, and somewhere in that infinite darkness, Elena knew, were the scattered remnants of human civilization. "Most species follow predictable patterns," the God Emperor explained. "They develop technology linearly. They expand cautiously. They either become unified under single governments or fragment into warring factions. They worship their creators or reject the concept of divinity entirely. They submit to superior force or fight until extinction. But not humans," Elena guessed. "Humans are chaos incarnate," the God Emperor said, and there was something like admiration in his voice. "You develop quantum computers and wooden sailing ships simultaneously. You write poetry about love while perfecting weapons of mass destruction. You kneel before gods and then stand up to punch them in the face. You are individually brilliant and collectively insane, capable of profound compassion and breathtaking cruelty, often within the same individual." Elena felt a growing unease. "You're talking about us like we're specimens." "Not specimens," the God Emperor corrected. "Warriors." The word hung in a healing fluid like a depth charge, its implications sinking slowly into Elena's consciousness. Around them, the walls continued to display the cosmic vista, but now Elena began to notice things that hadn't been visible before. Dark shapes moving between the stars. Gaps in the galactic structure where something vast had passed. And at the edge of perception, a wrongness that made her augmented nervous system scream warnings. "There's something out there," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Many somethings," the God Emperor confirmed. "Forces that make the Kerathan look like children playing with toys. Entities that consume realities the way you consume food. Intelligences so vast and alien that simply perceiving them can drive entire species to madness." Dr. Chen's instruments were going haywire now, detecting energy patterns that violated several fundamental laws of physics. "The Devourers," she breathed, recognizing something from the most classified human xenological files. the things that destroyed the predecessor civilizations. Among others, the God Emperor said grimly, they are stirring again, drawn by the expanding bubble of active galactic civilization. They sense the growing complexity of thought and matter, and they hunger for it. Elena felt pieces clicking into place with the terrible finality of firing pins striking a primer. That's why you've been playing God. Not for worship, not for power. You've been testing species, looking for soldiers. Looking for the right kind of soldiers, the God Emperor corrected. Most species, when faced with an enemy they cannot understand, either freeze in terror or charge blindly to their doom. Both responses are equally useless against entities that exist partially outside normal space-time. But humans don't freeze, and we don't charge blindly, Webb said, understanding dawning in his augmented eyes. Humans adapt, the God Emperor said. You see an impossible enemy and immediately start looking for creative ways to make it possible to kill. You encounter superior technology and figure out how to steal it, improve it, or work around it. You face gods and decide they need to be brought down a peg. Elena pushed herself upright in a healing web, ignoring the protest from her still recovering nervous system. How long do we have? The first wave will reach the outer rim colonies within 18 months, the God Emperor said. The main force will arrive within a decade. Every species in the galaxy will have a choice. Fight, flee, or hide. Most will choose the latter two options. And you want humanity to choose the first, Elena concluded. I want humanity to do what humanity does best, the God Emperor replied. I want you to look at an impossible situation and find a way to win anyway. The healing chamber fell silent except for the rhythmic pulse of the biomechanical systems. Elena stared out at the cosmos, at the dark shapes moving between the stars, and felt the weight of her species' future settling onto her shoulders like a familiar pack. She carried the responsibility for her soldiers' lives for years, but this was different. This was carrying the survival of human civilization itself. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. The God Emperor's form solidified, becoming more humanoid and somehow more approachable. An alliance. The Carathan possess technology that can enhance human capabilities beyond current limitations. We understand the enemy's nature and tactics, but we lack something crucial. We lack the kind of insane creativity that allows someone to punch a god and think it's a reasonable course of action. You want us to teach you how to be human, Dr. Chen said with sudden insight. We want to learn from each other, the God Emperor said. Carathan wisdom and human adaptability. Carathan technology and human ingenuity. Carathan long-term thinking and human spontaneous problem-solving. Elena looked at her companions, Webb with a scarred face and augmented body, Chun with her insatiable curiosity and scientific mind. They were so completely, utterly human in all their contradictions. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. There's something I need to know, Elena said. New Geneva. The 13 million people you killed. Was that part of the test too? The God Emperor's features shifted through expressions that had no human equivalent before settling into something that might have been profound sadness. No, that was a mistake. A failure of understanding on our part. We thought humanity needed to be humbled before you could be recruited. We thought you were like the other species we had encountered. But we're not, Webb said, his voice carrying controlled anger of a professional soldier. You are not, the God Emperor agreed. Other species fight for survival, for territory, for resources. Humans fight for principles, for ideas, for people you've never met and will never see again. When we destroyed New Geneva, we weren't humbling humanity. We were giving you a reason to hate us forever. Elena closed her eyes, seeing again the footage from New Geneva's final transmission. Children in schools, families at dinner, workers heading home after ordinary days. All gone in an instant of divine judgment. Some of us will never forgive you for that, she said quietly. Nor should you, the God Emperor replied. That anger, that unwillingness to let injustice pass, that is also part of what makes humans valuable as allies. You fight not just to win, but to ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Elena opened her eyes and met the God Emperor's alien gaze. If we do this, if humanity agrees to this alliance, what happens to our independence? our freedom to make our own choices. You remain human, the God Emperor said simply. You remain free. You remain chaotic and unpredictable and occasionally infuriating. Because those qualities are not flaws to be corrected. They are weapons to be unleashed. Elena made her decision with the same instinctive certainty that had kept her alive through a dozen impossible battles. It wasn't a decision made by committee or calculated through careful analysis. It was a decision made by someone who had looked into the dark and decided to punch it in the face. We'll need to return to Earth, she said, to discuss this with our leaders, to prepare our people for what's coming. Of course, the God Emperor agreed. But Captain, when you speak to your leaders, remember this. The enemy that is coming has destroyed civilizations that span galaxies. They have consumed the accumulated knowledge and culture of species that evolved when your son was young. They are, in every measurable way, superior to anything humanity has ever faced. Elena smiled, and it was the same predatory grin she'd worn when facing down Martian separatists with nothing but a broken rifle and pure stubbornness. Good. I was getting bored with easy fights. 6 months later, Elena stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Prometheus station, watching Earth turn slowly in the viewport. The planet looked the same as it always had, blue and white and beautiful in its fragility, but everything else had changed. The revelation of the coming threat had transformed human civilization overnight. The Colonial Assembly had voted unanimously to accept the Keratin Alliance, but on humanity's terms. Instead of worshiping their new allies, humans had immediately begun studying them, questioning them, and finding ways to improve upon their technology. The first wave of hybrid ships is ready for deployment, reported Admiral Sarah Kim, Elena's former superior who now commanded the combined human Keratin fleet. Our engineers have been having some interesting discussions with the Keratin bioarchitects. Elena could imagine. Human engineers approach problems like enemy fortifications to be stormed, while Keratin bioarchitects treated them like living organisms to be nurtured and guided. The collision of methodologies had produced technology that neither species could have developed alone. How interesting, Elena asked. The Defiance-class frigates can now punch holes through space-time using a combination of human nuclear pulse drives and Keratin reality manipulation, Admiral Kim said with the tone of someone who'd stopped being surprised by impossible things. The crew experiences a journey as normal flight, but external observers see the ship briefly cease to exist before reappearing at its destination. Elena nodded, unsurprised. Humanity had always excelled at taking elegant alien technology and turning it into weapons. What about the soldiers? Staff's Sergeant Webb's enhancement program has produced remarkable results, Admiral Kim continued. Volunteers are integrating Keratin biotechnology with human military augmentations in ways that our new allies find both fascinating and slightly terrifying. Through the viewport, Elena could see the construction yards where the new fleet was taking shape. Human ships had always been ugly, functional things, boxes with engines strapped on, bristling with weapons and armor. The new hybrid vessels maintain that aesthetic, while incorporating flowing Keratin design elements that seem to pulse with their own life. They're beautiful and terrible, Elena observed. Like their crews, Admiral Kim agreed. Speaking of which, the God Emperor requested to see you. He's in the diplomatic section. Elena made her way through Prometheus Station's corridors, noting the changes that 6 months of human Keratin cooperation had produced. The walls incorporated living Keratin biomatter that responded to human thoughts and needs, while human engineering had added redundant systems and manual overrides. Because humans never trusted technology, they couldn't fix with a wrench and some creative cursing. She found the God Emperor in what had once been the station's chapel, a space that humans had always used to grapple with questions of meaning and mortality. He stood before the large viewport, his form more solid and human-like than it had been during their first meeting. You've changed, Elena observed. As have you, the God Emperor replied. Proximity to humans has interesting effects on Keratin biology. We become more individual, more willing to act without consensus, more... He paused, searching for the word. More human, Elena suggested. More willing to punch gods, yes. the God Emperor said, and Elena was surprised to hear something like humor in his voice. Your species has a remarkable ability to make others more like yourselves simply by existing near them. Elena joined him at the viewport. Looking out at the fleet that represented the combined efforts of two species who had spent their first meeting beating each other up, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It is a necessary thing, the God Emperor said. The enemy we face operates on principles of absorption and homogenization. They turn diversity into uniformity, chaos into order, life into mere function. To defeat them, we must become something they cannot predict or understand. Something chaotic. Something human. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching a squadron of hybrid fighters practice maneuvers that would have been impossible for purely human or purely Keratin technology. The pilots were pushing the boundaries of physics and sanity with equal enthusiasm, turning space combat into a form of three-dimensional art that happened to involve explosions. I've been wondering, Elena said. When Staff Sergeant Webb punched you, you said we'd passed the first test. What were the other tests? The God Emperor's features shifted into what she'd learned was his equivalent of a smile. There were no other tests, Captain. That was the only test that mattered. Elena felt a familiar chill. What do you mean? Every other species we encounter responded to our displays of power in predictable ways, the God Emperor explained. They either submitted completely or fought until they were destroyed. Neither response suggested they could handle the kind of warfare we're facing. But humans sized up a god, decided he was talking too much, and hit him in the face, the God Emperor said. And then, instead of groveling for forgiveness or preparing for retaliation, you immediately started calculating how to do it better next time. Elena laughed despite herself. That does sound like us. It sounds like the kind of species that might look at incomprehensible cosmic entities and say, okay, but how do we kill them? The observation deck's door chimed, and Dr. Chen entered, followed by Staff Sergeant Webb. Both of them had changed over the past 6 months. Chen's scientific curiosity had been focused and weaponized by exposure to technologies that violated everything she thought she knew about physics, while Webb had undergone so many biomechanical enhancements that he was arguably more ship than human at this point. The outer rim sensors are picking up anomalous readings, Dr. Chen reported, her voice tight with controlled excitement and fear. Gravitational distortions, energy signatures that don't match any known natural phenomena, and other things. How much time do we have? Elena asked. 6 months, Webb said, his enhanced senses already processing threat assessments that his unaugmented brain couldn't have comprehended. Maybe less if they accelerate their approach. Elena looked around at her companions. The human scientist whose curiosity had become a weapon, the human soldier whose body had become a living tool of war, and the alien god who had learned to bleed and found it liberating. They were the strangest command team in the history of either species, and probably the galaxy's best hope for survival. Orders, Captain? Admiral Kim's voice came through the comm system. Elena took a deep breath, tasting recycled air and the ozone smell of advanced technology, and made a decision that would define humanity's place in the cosmic order. Signal the fleet, she said. All ships, all crews, all species. Tell them the enemy is coming, and we're going to show them what happens when you threaten a species crazy enough to punch gods. The God Emperor's laugh was no longer the sound of stars being born and dying. It was the sound of someone who had found something worth fighting for. And if they destroy us? Dr. Chen asked. Elena smiled, and it was a smile of a species that looked at an infinite universe full of wonders and dangers and decided to explore anyway. Then we'll make sure they remember us. We'll hit them so hard that every species in the next galaxy over will hear about the day humans declared war on the inevitable. Staff Sergeant Webb cracked his augmented knuckles, the sound like mechanical thunder. I like it. Simple plan, clear objectives, plenty of opportunity for creative problem solving. The most human plan possible, the God Emperor agreed. Attack the impossible, adapt to the incomprehensible, and punch anything that gets in the way. Elena turned back to the viewport, watching the hybrid fleet move into formation. Each ship carried a crew that represented the best and worst of human nature, brilliant and stubborn, compassionate and violent, rational and completely insane. They were the children of a species that had looked at the concept of divine authority and decided it needed adjustment. In the distance, space itself began to ripple as the enemy approached. They came as they always had, inevitable as entropy, inexorable as time, consuming everything in their path with the casual efficiency of natural law. But they had never encountered humans before. And humans, Elena reflected as she prepared to give the order that would begin the most important war in galactic history, had never met a natural law they couldn't find a way around, over, under, or through. All ships, she said into the comm system, her voice carrying to thousands of human and Carathan crew members who were about to attempt something that was either the height of courage or the depths of stupidity. This is Captain Elena Vasquez. Today, we're going to teach the universe something it's never learned before. She paused, feeling the weight of history and the anticipation of legend. Gods can bleed, laws can be broken, and humans don't kneel. The fleet moved forward into the dark, carrying with it the hopes and dreams and magnificent stubborn refusal to surrender that had taken humanity from caves to the stars. Behind them, Earth continued to turn in its ancient orbit, blue and white and beautiful. Ahead of them, the impossible enemy waited. And somewhere between the two, in the space where courage met catastrophe, the future of the galaxy hung in the balance, ready to be decided by a species crazy enough to punch gods and call it diplomacy. The war for everything began with a human smile and a declaration that had echoed across human history from the first time an early hominid had looked at a saber-toothed tiger and decided to throw rocks at it. Let's see what you've got. Asterisk in the end. They discovered that gods could indeed bleed, laws could indeed be broken, and humans would indeed never kneel. But more importantly, they learned that sometimes the most divine thing you can do is to stand up, square your shoulders, and punch the impossible right in its cosmic face. Asterisk, because that's what humans do. And gods help anyone who tries to stop them